started.
Not a problem.
I'm not gonna use the microphone.
Creating confusion.
Thank you very, very, what's wrong with the front row here? What's going on? Thank you very much.
In this case, you wouldn't have been able to.
Really appreciate it. You're gonna enjoy
Where's your
tonight's
backup to
very much. A
Facebook?
lot of information is gonna be
Where's your
shared. Just a
Facebook?
little bit of housekeeping.
Oh, there you
We've
go.
got exit door here that's locked on the outside, and then the entrance that you came in. The restrooms are next to the kitchen, down the hall, both for men and for women. And I gotta look at my notes here, the water. Do not drink or anything, use any of the water that's here. They're having some well issues, and the water is contaminated, so you don't want to take anything from any faucets or anything. We've got bottled water, and all the coffee is being made from bottled water, so we're all good. Make sure you get your coffee and your cookies and bottled water from the kitchen.
Yep.
Doug, are you in the kitchen? Okay. And let's see, as is customary, we will have a free will offering. That is how we thank our guest speakers. So we will be passing the basket later on. When you came in, there was a sign-in sheet, and you each got a tea light. And there is some contact information there from Margaret Starry. She's in the St. Paul area, and she has a group, and she'd love to have you take the contact information. And there's Margaret, right back there. She'd love to have you take some information and get in touch with her. I think we've got it. If anyone knows of a venue, we're always looking for places to hold our meetings. This is a lovely facility, but we're still looking for other places. So if anyone knows of a building or a venue that we could use for our facilities, as a facility for events coming up, please let us know. Let Wes or myself or Anthony know. And now I'm going to turn it, yes, sir.
There's a red truck out here with a dome light stuck on. Red pickup truck?
Red pickup truck with the dome light on. Anybody have a red
Well, I've got a red truck maybe.
Here we go, we got a
Facing
winner.
the grass.
Lenny, will you will stoop to nothing for attention?
I'll be back.
And I'm going to turn it over to Gary.
This past week, we had quite a celebration of life. Anybody remember who that was? Number 41. Did anybody notice the train that he was delivered to the cemetery on? Yeah. And that's what we got to remember. Together, we got to be hooked up and be part of the train. And if we don't, what's happening in 2020? So let's think about that for 1 minute, and I'd just like us to pledge allegiance to the flag, and then we'll get started with the meeting. So if we stand to do that, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if you remain standing for a moment, I'd just like to pray over us for safety and security, and for the people that traveled from a distance to come and share with us what's going on in rural Minnesota. So Father, tonight we come and pause. We thank you for the benevolence that you've done to each one of us. You've given us life of freedom, like we just said to pledge. But do we really understand what freedom is? Freedom from this, freedom from that, freedom from this. So let's not be bound up by untruths, half-truths. Let us be set free, because Messiah is coming. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Yeah, it was the young lady.
My name's Anthony. Just a quick note, we got hijacked again. Somebody's trying to make money off of our programs. We don't ask or put anything out for you to donate online. We do a free will offering at each one of these that we do, but there's been people getting a hold of our email and piggybacking us onto their websites and saying if you donate here, it goes to this cause. So it's fraud. So we never send anything out. If you get anything from Dee Dee, Diane, It's always just same the way it was, every time you come, it's a goodwill offering, don't spend any money, don't donate online, because it's not us, we're never gonna do it, and it's the way it is. And the way we look at it, if you don't have any money, we still want you to come, because we need to have the information out there. If you do have some money to pass on, a goodwill gesture, that's great, and helps us out as well for our guest speakers. Have a good night, and Wes, you're next.
This year on Armistice Day, world leaders gathered in Paris to mark the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. This Remembrance Day was ironic, as the current king of Morocco dozed off and slept during the ceremonies. The EU bureaucratic manager of France, the so-called President of France, Mr. Macron, as I like to call him, lectured our President Trump on the evils of nationalism, the evils of patriotism, the evils, right? Our President Trump had said, "I am a nationalist." Mr. Macron seems to miss the irony. Were it not for American nationalism, American patriotism, American exceptionalism, Mr. Macron would be speaking German. We do not need an arrogant Frenchman to define the meanings of our words in English. No, thank you, Mr. Macron. We English speakers are quite capable of defining our words in our own language without the help of an EU bureaucrat. What a difference a month makes in political life. A few short weeks later, the streets of all major French cities, as well as several other European cities, are filled with tanks, armored personnel carriers, and soldiers of fortune. Do these machines of war and soldiers carry the flags of the nations they have invaded? No, they sport the emblem of the EU empire. Merkel has lost power in Germany, but she's set to take over suddenly as the High Chancellor of the EU. There is surely more trouble to come. A new Iron Curtain, as Winston Churchill had warned us once a time, has descended over Europe, and we face a near complete media silence in the legacy media, in the legacy press here in America. Cell phone towers are down in Europe, and patriots are unable to get news out of the EU. The globalists are putting down the people of Europe in order to make way for something and someone new. No one must question why the traditional peoples are being replaced. Tonight we're going to learn much about what the UN and unelected EU bureaucrats would like to do to us right here in Minnesota, in Rochester. The same blasphemy laws which have been introduced so successfully in Europe and Canada have been introduced in the US Senate and Congress. Our local mayor has already bowed to them as well. Once the stuff of science fiction, a group of radicals is trying to control your speech, your words, and so thusly your thoughts. Observe France, observe Europe, and repeat after me. Open borders plus welfare state equals national suicide. Do not think local. Whenever I hear someone say, think local, I hear them saying, put your head in the sand. The purpose here tonight is to educate ourselves for what is to come, because we're living in times during which Bible prophecy is becoming actual history. This week in Marrakesh, the king of Morocco's own Marrakesh, the one who slept through that Armistice Day ceremony, King Hassan Teni, his father, King Mohammed Hamis, his grandfather, long dreamt of taking the Hijrah from Al-Maghreb into Europe again. This week in Marrakesh, the UN Pacts on Global Migration and Population Replacement have been signed. Demographics is destiny. EU and UN bureaucrats have decided that Minnesota needs a new crop. Mr. Ron Branstner is tracking all these issues. Prepare to be astonished. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Ron Branstner.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I need a microphone. My voice is pretty deep, so anybody hear me okay? All right, is it okay? Many years ago when I came back from California, this is like a Super Bowl to me when I come to Rochester. I've been speaking down in Austin and Albert Lee and all the way from Aberdeen, South Dakota, Wisconsin. I've always wanted to come to Rochester because this is like a this is like one of the ground zeros there in Austin, Minnesota. I'm gonna kind of get into that a little bit. So when we come down to southern Minnesota, there's a lot of friction down here. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. Especially, most of the people don't even know what's happening. It's happening right under their noses. So to come here, this is really an honor to get back down here. About 10 years ago, I did a presentation. It was on USA Today in Austin. And And I've been speaking about the Hormel Foundation, the Blandon Foundation, and that is the doorway to Minnesota, by the way. Whether you know this or not, I've been doing this for years. Austin, Minnesota is the doorway for immigration and refugee resettlement. And there's many reasons why, and again, that's another presentation, but I wanted you to know that this is a very hot area for me. Some of the faces I do recognize in there, I know many people came from all over to get here, so I'm actually gonna try something a little bit different to see if I can get my point across tonight. I came here to talk about free speech and how we're losing free speech, but in the process of my presentation, I've been talking to Wes back here, and he just kept adding and adding. He said, no, they gotta hear this, and they gotta hear this. I just don't know if I don't have time. He said, no, they wanna help, they want all this information. So it ended up being that what I was gonna come and talk about, which I am, is now towards the end of the presentation, which is pretty stellar, and you guys will be pretty shocked when you get into that. So, on that note, I'm gonna use a metaphor, which is chess. Do you guys know, anybody know how to play chess in here?
Oh, yeah.
The game of chess, it's pretty, you know how the players work. Well, we're gonna use, this is the first time I've done this, but it really makes sense to me. When you use the game of chess and you use what's happening in the United States right now, they fall hand in hand. And so all the players are right there. And this game's been around for 1,500 years. It's been, the Arabs had it, the Persians had it, and it's brought down to the United States. When it got to the United States, that's when they put the cross on top of the king's head, because that represented the monarchy and the religious values here in the United States. So that's why the cross went on the top of the head, because the Muslims, the Arabs took over Persia, and then when the game came here, that's why they turned it to a Christian game. The cross went on the head. So if you guys know how this game plays, I'm going to play it out in reality, what's happening now. So if you understand the players here, the pawns that are up front, these are two opposing teams, two kings or two ideas. And we want to say two ideas or two concepts that are in war with each other. Whether it be capitalism or communism, whether it be Islam or it be Christianity, it doesn't matter. These are two warring fractions, but the warring fractions are still have an end result. They have one king or one ruler, and that it doesn't matter. It's just two tribes, and which one of them are going to be the leader of the board or the leader of the world. That's what we're trying to get to in real life. And when you look at this, you see the pawns here in the game. They are useful idiots. They're just basically they're foot traffickers. They're your soldiers. They get out there, they spread the message, and they spread the message for whatever ideology there is. They get out there, pass the literature out. I call them community-wide organizers. You probably all heard of that, right? Obama was good for putting out the community-wide organizers. And they can only move in little bits, passing out literature, spreading their ideology that's been handed down from the government. But they're useful. They can be disposed at any time. The government really doesn't care for them because they can just refill them and keep refilling them. And they're just, this would be like interfaith dialogues, the churches, the ones that spread this message that's handed down. This particular guy is the rook, and he has the position to go into the national, and the local, national, and international. He can go the length of the board either way, and he can travel the earth, but he travels with money. And this is what we call the foundations. The foundations is what I talk about, the Hormel Foundation, Mayo Clinic Foundation, the Blandon Foundation, McKnight Foundation. These are all the foundations in Minnesota. And these guys have the leverage. Like McKnight and these guys can only go to about here. When you get the bigger foundation, Carnegie's and the Gateses, they can go worldwide. So this is the national right in here. And each one of these have different levels of money. The international will hand down to the national will hand down to the local foundations, which are really, really big in this area. Foundations run your city, and I'll tell you how they do that. So these guys have a lot of leverage to where they're at. They're a 501c3 or a 501c4. Power this way or that way. The knight has only the power to move within its government. So think of this, the knight as a politician. he can only go one up and one over, but he has to stay in what we call the republic. The republic is the rule of law, so when you vote in a politician, the politician has to stay within the rule of law. So they can only go to within a district of where they're at. So their movement isn't real big, but they get money from foundations only if it's given to them from personal wealth. They don't get it from grants, they get it from, if I donate money to a foundation from a personal, they can then use that money to solicit that to a campaign or a politician, but they can't take actual grant money and give it to a politician. So these foundations are getting about 97% of federal grant money from the federal government, which is your money. They get about 3% of your money when you hand it to them personally. They take that 3% and they lobby with the politicians. That's how they get leverage and get into power. The third guy here is the bishop. The bishops are your churches. They are very similar to the rook. The rook can go this way and this way, but they hit you at a different avenue. The bishops will hit you from a morality issue. Because they don't go out this way, they'll diagonally and they'll run the gamut. But they're hitting you with a message that's handed to them from a morality, and we're going to find out why I say that. So if there's a moral issue behind this, they'll get their money handed to these guys, and they'll run it that everything is a morality thing. The reason you do this is love thy neighbor. You've probably heard that, these campaigns, they run interfaith dialogues, they use the churches to push their message. They're pushing the message through the foundations and they're handing, and they're doing it at a different angle. The queen is the most powerful on the board. She can do everything that the other ones can do. The queen is your government. Whatever government it is, whether it's Islam or whether it's Christianity or the United States government, it doesn't matter. The queen is the most powerful government when they're in power. They have control of everybody. The king is who's ever in power. So we use the king as an ideology. Again, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's capitalism, whether it's socialism or communism, whatever's in power, this is the guy that dictates the message. He is the message that has the least amount of power of all the players on the board, other than the pawns. The king can't do anything other than dictate. He really can't go left or right. He just sits in the back and he hands out orders. So whoever, it's an ideology, it's a thought. It's Christianity, it's Islam, it's communism. It's the ideology of the game. But all of these work in perpetuity with each other. This is your money internationally, nationally, and local. This is your politicians, this is your churches, and this is your government. All controlling you through the government, and it doesn't matter which one wins, it's still, the idea behind it is still domination of a particular group. It could be two sects that are fighting each other, two different groups in the same country with the same, but they just have two different roles, they just have two different leaders, and whoever wins. But what we're seeing here, why I showed you this, and what has changed in the last, let's see, about 40 years, they realize that these two have been fighting over and over and over again for years. And they're constantly destroying each other, their cultures, their ideas, and they die, and then they just redo the game over again. So what's happened in the last, since 1992, these two have decided to partner up together. And they partnered up together with the same ideology to control us, but they're on the same field because it doesn't matter. The ideology's there, it's just what fraction or which group is going to take over. But now they partnered up together. And now you're saying, well, who is it? Who partnered up together? Well, in 1992, or let's go back. So in 1987, the United Nations put out a memo, and they wanted somebody to find out what it was on the United States, on the world, what the effects were on global warming. Two people got together. A very wealthy man named Maurice Strong.
Yep.
And he died last year. He was in hiding in China for all the scandals that he did. He was in the oil for food scandal. You guys remember that one? He was the head of the oil for food scandal. He was the one who said that he tried to trap the biggest water aquifer in the United States, where Ed Fukushima, I think his name was. And then they tried to block off the water supply, and they were going to try to control the water and sell it off to people. The environmentalists found out what he was doing, and they stopped it, and they shut that down. So, I'm going to get back one step. So, and then they partnered up with a lady named Gro Brundtland, who is the head of the World Socialist Party, and she was the head of Norway 3 times. And so those two partnered up. A socialist and a capitalist partnered up. Out of this book that they wrote in 1987, they wrote a book called Our Common Future. And they brought it to the World Earth Summit in 1992. And there was 50,000 delegates there. Out of the 50,000 delegates, there were 178 heads of state. And they voted on whether they wanted this book to proceed worldwide, as a worldwide effort of all the countries together on the same idea. Our Common Future was then ratified in 1992. George H. Bush brought it over from the World Earth Summit, brought it back to the United States. He did not win the presidency. Bill Clinton won the presidency, and he signs it into an executive order into the United States. And that was what they call, and they wrote a book called Agenda 21 at the United Nations. That was brought over here from Our Common Future. So Agenda 21 was written out of a 40-chapter book, and then that was codified. So out of that book, there was a think tank out of the United Nations. A think tank wrote this, and this is why global warming is a false deal. It's a false narrative. And this is what they wrote out of the think tank, out of the United Nations. The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with a new idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortage, famine, and the likes would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. And it is only through changed attitudes and behaviors that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. That's pretty diabolical, isn't it? They're using their weapon now was global warming, but man is really the problem. And poverty, they united a poverty issue with an environmental issue. And then they wrote this. So they said that man is actually the enemy, and they used global warming as their ploy to try to convince everybody that this was something we could all unite behind. All the countries could unite behind one idea. Maurice Strong then wrote, "Is it the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilization collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about?" Maurice Strong, the head of the United Nations Environmental Program, said we must destroy the industrialized countries. That would be the United States, England, the European nations. They wanted to destroy this because they believed that we were using too much fossil fuels and too much energy, and we must then take the money from the industrialized countries and give that money to the developing countries. That's why you're seeing so much money leaving the United States right now. You're seeing it leave by the millions. We just saw, how many millions leave the airport? Just recently, the Somalian airport scandal with the daycare center. You guys heard of that? That was all part of this. The GDP in the United States is 0.7%. The United States GDP is around 18 trillion, and you take 0.07%, that's around $18 billion a year that we send out of the country to the developing countries. So because of this program. We've got the GDP that we're sending up, but that's not enough. So how do they do it? How do they take from the industrialized countries and then give it to the developing countries? They do it through bringing refugees and immigrations, through high amounts of refugees and immigrants into these developed countries like Europe. You saw what happened in Europe in the last couple of years, right? The flooding in Europe. They let the doors open because they knew that once they got there, they would take that money out and they would send it back to the developing countries. Send it back to their homeland. They were going to destroy the industrialized countries by taking the money out and then sending it back to the developing countries. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that and why that works. So they took a global warming idea from the World Earth Summit in 1992 and a poverty area, and they combined the two together. A socialist and a capitalist got together and they created this program, Agenda 21. The book is 40 chapters long. They codified it down. And this is Maurice Strong. You just read his quote. And if you ever heard the word sustainability, you hear all these politicians talk about sustainability. They say, we got to have a sustainable, this is going to be a sustainable environment. You see it in everything in the Rochester. Go up and pull up Rochester and pull up their framework, pull up their sustainability, pull up anything. It all says sustainability. Well, she quoted this, sustainability. Sustainability, this is the actual definition at the United Nations. Sustainability development is developed that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. That was a quote by Branstner, and she partnered with Maurice Strong. A socialist and a capitalist. And he was in hiding because of all the things he did. This is the book they wrote. It meant nothing. It was a soft treaty when it came to 1992 at the World Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. They then made this book, Agenda 21, 40 chapters, and then they codified that down into an action plan. How do we make this work worldwide? How do we convince everybody that the world is a problem and mankind is a problem? And how do we get everybody on board on the chess game, all to fight for the same ideas and the same goals? Well, they broke it down into an action plan, 800 pages, and they wrote the Biodiversity Environmental Assessment Plan, and you could actually order that. It's quite long, very lengthy. But that's the actual action plan of how they're running their life. There is nothing, and I ask people to do this, there is nothing that I can't find in that book that I can't relate back to your life. Your telephones, your water supply, what you drink, what you eat, how much preservatives they put in your food. They, smart grows, smart telephones, smart TVs, walkways, pathways, bikeways. You ever hear that Rochester's doing these new bikeway things and pathways and bicycles that they did in LA, or LA, that's recently, Minneapolis, where they had these bicycles, you stick a quarter in there and you drive a bicycle around town. That's all part of this. Why are they so entrenched on bicycles? Because we are using too much fossil fuels, and we must get you to get away from carbon and stop driving as much and get you back to driving bicycles. And that's why they're doing stack and packs. They're building apartment complexes with movie theaters in them, easy parkways, open spaces. And all of that is done in here to get you off the highways, to get you into a closed environment, off the wetlands. There's a wetlands project in Minnesota called the Teddy Roosevelt Wetlands Project. They want to go back to Minnesota, back to 1858. It's all in there. Back to 1858. They're taking all your property away from you. They're regulating you off the land to back to what it was, because they believe that the earth should go back to what it was before we got here. Give back to the earth what we took away. Now, this is not hyperbole. This is not conjecture. This is not something I made up. This is an actual plan at the United Nations level. This is high speed, and you guys, I'm going to get more into this, you guys are right in the path. Your mayor signed some stuff recently, and your city is so dead on. Same with St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Wilmer, and a lot of these cities, they're running on this at warp speed. Right now, I think Rochester ranks probably 4th in the state. They're at level 85 now, out of 169. Most cities are at 2, 3, and 8. Rochester's at warp speed, and I'm going to get into that as we go, and I'll show you. So Agenda 21, codified into a book, to the biodiversity plan. When it came to the United States, Bill Clinton signed on to this with an executive order, and these are executive orders, so if you want to research this, I'll show the executive order in a minute. If this book was never written, the refugee resettlement program that we have today, and the immigration problems that we have today, and all this stuff with this energy and global warming would not exist if it wasn't for Bill Clinton signing on to a universal United Nations agenda. If he would have never signed on to that, the problems that you see today never would not be here today if he would not have signed on to that. They broke this down, and this is the most important one to you, because the biodiversity plan was broken down and codified into another book, which breaks it down to your city and your regional area. And that's what they work off here, smart growth. Every level, remember I told you on the chessboard, you had your city, you had your national, and you had your international. You have your international, your national, and your city. It's all broken down. Everything you do, from the air you breathe, to the food you drink, to the preservatives that are in your food, to the fluoride that's in your water, is all broken down into an action plan. There is nothing that you can't tell me that I can't find. Because if I said to you, I wanted to find something, I want to find out something about multicultural gardens, all I have to do is go on the computer and say multicultural gardens, United Nations toolkit. There is a toolkit to everything you do, from your phones to everything, food. There's a toolkit that's made, that's designed, and they are watching you at every, it sounds almost like Orson Welles, doesn't it? It really does. And when you come in here, I have to show you that this isn't me. And I have to do that because if you hear me, you're going to think, this guy's nuts. Because it sounds crazy. But this is fact, I'm going to keep showing you. When you see the word comprehensive blueprint, the United Nations comprehensive blueprint for the reorganization of human society, that's what they said. The reorganization of human society. They're going to reorganize you from the cars you drive to the energy you use to your pathways, walkways, bikeways. It doesn't matter. There's going to be buffer zones in the United States, and we got maps on that places you can and cannot go. They're actually eliminating dams. Why are they eliminating dams in the United States and the world? Because they wanted to take it back before 1858. They are eliminating dams. And you can look that up. They're taking them up because they have to go back to the way it was before 1858. They are putting buffer zones around lakes now. They're watching. You ever go to a lake now? There's somebody there when you guys fish. You know, you go to a lake and there's somebody. Hey, okay, what lake have you been on? Have you been on this lake before? No, I was at another lake. Okay, what lake were you on? They're checking underneath your boat. They're checking everything. That's all part of this agenda because it's an Environmental Species Act. They're going to start regulating you that if you're on certain lakes or whatever, you can't go to a different lake because they don't want species to cross-contaminate other lakes. This is all part of this global warming. So they're trying to reorganize you, and that was at the World Earth Summit in 1992. The cost of this program, to make this work worldwide, they're actually under budget, they're losing money. It costs $45 trillion, that's with a T, $45 trillion to make this program work. The United States has the biggest investment of $7 trillion into this. So your taxpayer money is being invested into regulating you, regulating your life, regulating, okay, I'll give you an example. Selling cars. They got cars now where you can push a button and you say, Alexa, turn my lights on, I'll be home in 15 minutes. Alexa, turn my garbage disposal on. These